Speaking of reliability, a podcast with good friends talking with you about reliability engineering topics. Welcome to Speaking of Reliability. This is Fred Schenkelberg.
And this is Chris Jackson, and we were just talking about how you can rely/not rely on a laboratory to help you come up with a test strategy.
This is based on a question, and it was, hey, I got a quick question for you. To paraphrase, is that we're looking, and this is from Anita, and she's saying we're looking to do some accelerated aging shelf life testing. And do you know of any good labs or test houses would you recommend to run this for us? I got some more information when I went back and forth, but part of it was they wanted to say, hey, we need to know if this will last. And they wanted to hand the whole project, the question, to a lab and have them go run it. And I don't know about you, Chris, but I have not found a lab that would be able to answer that question with that kind of input. If you said, here's our product, here's our design, and it needs to last for 2 years under these conditions, can you tell us will it will or not? And most labs I've ever worked with would not have the capability to do that.
Yeah, I mean, I'm trying to think of a scenario where that wouldn't be the case. And the only time I could think that would be not where a lab could actually do that for you is if you have a very simple system or a very single component which that laboratory knows inside and out. Like, I don't know, a specific diode, for example, and it might be an electronic component testing lab, which just happens to know how that diode fails over time. But I sense you're going back to, correct me if I'm wrong, well, this is where I'm going with it. I think you're going to the same place too, is that you need to know how it's going to fail before you can work out how it's going to age.
Yeah.
Is that?
Yeah.
That's
part of it. If you have a product, for example, or a whole system, well, that makes it pretty vague. I can throw it in a chamber and it'll be at 85C for a couple hours. Is that good enough? I don't know. I don't know how it fails.
Because you can only accelerate a failure mechanism.
Yeah.
And if your laboratory doesn't know what the dominant failure mechanisms are, they're going to take a guess at best.
Yeah. I found, and to be fair, there's a whole range of test houses and laboratories out there that will, and some of them are nothing but chamber farms. They have a whole warehouse full of chambers and chamber spaces and different sizes and stuff. And you have to bring in your own measurement equipment, monitoring equipment, samples, and any fixturing. They may have engineering staff to help you get that stuff set up, and they'll monitor it for you. But I've not found labs with that kind of a mindset to design an accelerated test, do the calculations, and interpret it for you. They just have too many products coming and going that they don't have that expertise in-house, unless you happen to get really lucky and find somebody that's really good at accelerated testing and then ask you all the right questions so they can design it. On the other extreme,
then, you got to have the answers to those questions. So if you haven't done a FMEA or a fault tree analysis or RCA or whatever, fishbone diagram, whatever it is for you to work out what those vital few are, your answers are going to be ill-informed.
Yeah. Well, the other extreme is you go to a lab like CALS or DFR Solutions and say, hey, we need to understand if this will work. And they will put their folks and handful of grad students together and say, all right, we're going to go do a 3-year study to figure out what are the failure mechanisms and how to quantify it. And then we can tell you. So there's a couple of extremes on there, but I think it's incumbent on a team to say, well, we need to answer to this question, and they need to roll their sleeves up and go do some more work before they go to the lab.
Right. I mean, if you see a product which has, let's just say, some sort of rubber on it, I like rubber as an example because that's a really useful thing, or a really easy thing to do accelerated live testing on. But
really,
something. Yeah, when it comes to temperature, you can really accelerate how rubber perishes over time.
Well, not if it's rubber's gasket on a petrochemical exposure to it, then it's got all kinds of other chemical reactions besides just temperature.
I know, but rubber, as in, there's lots of other more simple applications for rubber. I take your point when you got exposure to chemicals.
Shark bite, for example, if you're on a,
Okay. All right.
Oh, complete aside. I almost forgot that I mentioned this to you. We were chatting earlier. Is a friend of Greg Hutchins sent me a photo of Bondi Beach, which I think you know where it is. Bondi Beach. And there's a stout-looking officer of the peace standing there under this sign posted on this big board saying, no running without a helmet, fines will be applied. And then it had other official-looking stuff, including please log your jog before you head out so we know you're safe, kind of thing. And I mean, do they do stuff like that in Australia? Do they tell you to wear a helmet when you're running?
Never heard of that one.
All right, I'll have to send you the picture of it because, pictures, absolute proof, But no, it was actually, I saw an article. Greg also sent me an article he found. It's a satirical artist, a couple of folks that are creating this, they take a picture and then they Photoshop in the warning signs, and it's to get after the nanny state of parts of Australia.
I used to be a surf lifesaver down at Maroubra Beach. For those of you who know Sydney, well, it's a few beaches south of Bondi. Maroubra is about the same size as Bondi, and it's a nice beach. It's not nearly as crowded. And I used to live at Maroubra as well in Coogee, and so I used to run from Maroubra Beach up to Bondi Beach and back quite often. Beautiful. Oceanside Trail. You go past beach after beach after beach, and I've never once done that with a helmet.
Oh, just big risk taker, I tell you, you just live dangerous. Yeah, and then it was posted on LinkedIn, and somebody said, "Well, this is crazy. They just bought, saying it's okay to go swim with the sharks, but you can't run without a helmet, or what's wrong with these people?" Greg was amazed that so many people thought it was real. And it turns out to be just a satirical jab at the local constabulary, looking at different ways to protect people. But mostly from the lockdowns, I think, is where it got its inspiration. But anyway, complete aside. But let's say you're going to go test a helmet, right?
Or
a running helmet.
Something with rubber on.
Yeah, a rubberized running helmet.
Good old traditional running helmet.
That's right.
But the thing is, I mean, the design, the rubber could have been designed to be so thick that even with acceleration or aging, it still might not be the weakest point of your system.
Yeah.
But a similar system, which also uses rubber, it might have been designed to be a bit thinner, and just so happens now because it's thinner, that system over there, which has the same specifications, well, aging that rubber is now brutally important for understanding how long it's going to last, because that's now the weakest link. So you can't even just look at a system and say it has rubber, therefore accelerated life testing needs to be based on the rubber failure mechanism, because you don't even know if that's the dominant failure mechanism for the way that thing is designed.
The question that would come to my mind with that scenario you just painted leads to, is it UV exposure that's causing it to lose its tensile strength? Is it compression strength that it's affected by the chemicals that are around it or the atmosphere that's around it? Is it a stretch, or is it cycling or cyclic in its use, and then it has micro tears and shreds that way? It's just that most any material has many ways it can fail, and those require different approaches to excite them. And just knowing that, besides the design intent is another key piece to it.
Well, I don't know if we have an Ascendo policy on trying not to, be too provocative to listeners who ask questions, but it just sounds to me like this is an organization that wants to outsource critical thinking, which I've never seen go well.
Yeah, no, and I understand organizations are busy. They got a lot on their plate. There's lots going on. And, oh, yeah, we need to do a shelf life. We have to show, and I have no idea if this is a medical product or not. We need to show that it can sit on the shelf for 2 years and it's fine. And when a product is in a shelf, if it's controlled, you would expect very little aging that temperature would excite, except for diffusion and gravity and corrosion, and all these other things that can apply, even when it's just sitting there. But the idea of, well, is there a place I can outsource this? So there is a scenario where I think that works. Let's say you have a regulatory requirement that says you have to run ASTM standard, blah, 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 or IAC standards, you have to run this test. And even though it doesn't really make any sense and nobody knows how to interpret it, you got to run this test. There are test labs that's what they do. They run they're certified to run those standard tests in a way that the standards bodies and other people recognize that they did it to the standard. And in those cases, outsource that.
Because the object is to pass a test. It's not to gain useful insight about making something more reliable.
Right. Now, if the other hand is it's a customer says, will it last 2 years? And you got to do some critical thinking. You got to figure out, well, how would I'm thinking of the reliability case where you say, well, here's what we know about it. Here's the dominant failure mechanism. If it's sitting here, we expect this, and this to be the life limiting elements of it. We're going to excite it this way because it's relevant to the failure mechanism. At that point, then you can hand it off to a lab to go run it, or a chamber facility to run it. But you still have to be pretty active involved with that. So I agree with you that the critical thinking part is almost always required if it's not just running a rote standard test. In my opinion of rote standard tests, by and large, are if you have to do it, you got to do it, but just hold your nose and look the other way.
well, don't expect anything useful to come back. I mean, that's not true, actually. There are some like well-known aircraft components, for example, that we know they're simple. We know the mechanics inside and out, and we do have some pretty good regulatory qualification tests where if that component is able to withstand these stresses, it's almost certainly going to last the lifespan of that product or that aircraft, I should say. There are examples like that. But if you're developing your own system or it's something you've designed or it's not, it's quite different and unique, then it's going to have different and unique weak points. And until you know those weak points, you're just wasting your time testing if the aim is to try and work out what that means in terms of a typical time to failure.
Yeah. Now, there's a whole nother aspect to this question we hadn't touched on yet, though, Chris. It's where's this? It mentions it's the aging shelf life type test. Well, where's the shelf located? What's its environment?
Right.
If it's in a container on the back of a ship someplace, or it's on the container in the Arizona desert, it's going to be a whole lot different environment than, in the hospital storage room. Even those can be pretty variable.
You've got fire extinguishers. You might have the same model fire extinguisher on a boat or an Arctic cabin, or you think you throw more examples, but they're very different scenarios. And fire extinguishers, to be fair, are pretty damn good these days because we know the technology inside and out.
Yeah. Yeah. And I guess that's the point you were just making, though, is that, is this a novel new thing that maybe you don't really know how it's going to fail? And I mean, then it's a whole lot more work to really answer the question well, or is it a well-known technology that you got tons of information on and you could zero it in pretty quick? It could be straightforward, not simple, but straightforward. I did run into one team. They really didn't have a good way to accelerate it that made sense. And most of that was based on that not knowing which of the many potential mechanisms would really apply. So they just put it on the shelf for 2 years. They invested in let's put a bunch of samples up and we'll pull them out and it was a destructive test to see if they survived or not. It was say like a reagent that goes into some process for counting blood cells. I think it was something like that. And was it still effective? And so they set up, I don't know how many hundreds of samples, and every 3 months they pulled out a batch of them and tested them and looked for any signs of degradation. And that's a brute force way. If you got 2 years to wait, that's the way to do it. Mm-hmm. Just don't change anything in those 2 years that you have to redo the test.
But it's also an insurance policy, because even if most listeners would say, that's great, but my company's not going to wait 2 years before we launch. Mm-hmm. But it doesn't hurt to have products on the shelf, so to speak. So while your customers are using it, if you're actively looking into how your things behave on the shelf, well, bad news doesn't get better with age. So if you can find out about a problem before your customers find out about a problem, well, you're already ahead of the game. It still sucks. It's still an unpleasant situation. But at time to preemptively do something about it, perhaps you can say, hey, customers, please check this. We've noticed there might be an issue if this washer looks slightly purple, then it means this. But you start a conversation about getting ahead of the curve, as opposed to having angry customers who yell at you before they never buy a product from you again.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, and that depends on the industry. Some industries won't let you go to market, I think, in medical products without answering those kind of questions.
Which I get.
Yeah. And some others, it might be Walmart. It says, well, we don't want it on our shelf for 2 years, so we don't really care about shelf life.
Right.
We just want to move it, get it out of here.
Yeah.
No, but I found, each lab, each test facility usually have some kind of speciality that they go after. They might have some unique assets or equipment. And some labs, the better ones I find, have a good failure analysis facility and people that can help you analyze failures and understand what they mean and what's causing them and such. The very high end labs are like Exponent or DFR Solutions that have whole raft of very smart people, and they'll customize pretty much anything for you, and do detailed research to make it all work. You pay for it right off the bat. And some people go straight to those folks to say, all right, we've got a year, we need to get the right answer. But
the problem with that is, and I'm not even having a go at the Calces of the world, because they provide a service, but if you are getting someone to do exploratory testing to work out how your thing can fail, you've already lost the benefit of the corporate knowledge that sits in those people's brains who design the thing in the first place. Because just do a basic FMEA or fault tree analysis or fishbone diagram at the very start. So, all right, you guys know how to design it. You know how to make, therefore you should have a good idea of the likely ways it can fail. And, 9 times out of 10, if you think about it at the very start, this will degrade if humidity gets in here. Okay, well, you can do an accelerated aging test, 3 years later to work out how fast the humidity is going to accelerate that failure mechanism. Or you could put a cheap waterproof membrane over the top of it in your first design.
Yeah, and just eliminate.
We don't have this conversation.
Minimize it. Yeah, right from the card, or use a different material or whatever. Yeah,
right, exactly. All of a sudden, you've made a design change which could either be free or maybe cost 1 cent per product or unit or what have you. My point is, usually these design changes, when they're put in before you start designing anything significant,
it's pretty
almost
expensive.
Free.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah, maybe the hour discussion it took to figure out that you had a problem there. That's about it.
But would you rather have an accelerated live test using humidity because you worked out this thing's the weakest point of your system's going to fail due to humidity exposure? You want to have that accelerated live test 3 years from now, or do you just want to have it designed out of your system?
Yeah.
I know which one I'd want.
Yeah, same. No, but it also goes to the extreme. I use Dilbert as the example. It's like, well, if your product fails due to solar UV radiation, UV exposure, you can either put a lot of sunscreen on it or just don't put it outside. Put the warning label not to be used outside, even though it's a portable umbrella.
It's an umbrella. No,
a sunshade. A sunshade. Don't use outside.
Right.
Yeah, but then there's labs that it's a partnership. They have certain skills and capabilities and assets and insights. And when you're talking to the different labs and interviewing them, is what are they good at? What do you need to bring to the table? How can you partner to make this work so you get to the answer you want? And that's the general guide I have of working with labs. Work with the labs that fit well with what you know and don't know and what they know and don't know, and that you get to a solution. And most labs are willing to chat with you about, here's what we can do and here's what we're good at. And here's how we can help you. Have you thought about this? And other labs will bring your samples down, throw them in the chamber. We'll try not to burn the building down while they're here.
Well, it's a world of difference going to a lab saying, here's my brand new prototype. Can you do accelerated aging on it? We don't know how it's going to fail over to you, Blue Leader. Yeah. Or you do that and have the same conversation, say, look, the things that keep us up at night are these 5 components. This one over here, we're just concerned about surface conductivity when the humidity increases, and this is this and this and this. And all of a sudden, a good lab will be able to say, oh, okay, well, if you're concerned about humidity for that, then we can look at doing test X, Y, Z. And then you have that conversation I think you're talking about. Yep. But you just can't turn up just going, well,
here's one sample. Can you tell me? That's my favorite. Here's a sample. We need to know if it'll last 40 years. Can help us out here. And it's
right. But you can't outsource critical thinking, or you can. You just won't have a good result.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah. Well, I think we've critically thought about this one for a little bit, and hopefully it helped out Anita a little bit. I gave her a few answers, but not all the ones we talked about. So I'll have to follow up my message and get her a little bit better answer. And so if you've got questions, this was one today, and our last episode was initiated based on another person's question. So we'd like to keep that trend going. So if you've got a question or an idea or a topic that you'd like us to chat about, fire it off, send it on over, and we enjoy it. And there's plenty of ways for you to get in touch with us over at accendoreliability.com/go/SOR. There's a couple of ways to leave a message for us. Chris and I and the other hosts are available through LinkedIn, which seems to be a popular way to get in touch with us, or on our about pages. You can send us a direct email or comment form. There's a whole bunch of ways to get in touch with each of us. But yeah, we'd like to build this up a bit. We're at over 750 episodes on our way to 1,000. So we just need 250 more questions, and then we'll hit that milestone. We'll be in good shape.
I think we've got at least 250 more questions.
Yeah. At least they're out there. And other than that, we've got plenty of questions ourselves so that we can fill in as going. But we enjoy hearing from you. We like to get you an answer, keep you moving, keep learning. And I find that the best way to do that is ask a question and get some insights that every time we do this, Chris, I learn something. So I enjoy our discussions on these kind of topics.
Me too.
It's all good stuff.
All
right. Well, thanks, Chris. We'll talk to you again soon. Have a good one.
Absolutely. You too.
Thanks. Thanks for listening to Speaking of Reliability. We invite you to join the conversation. If you have a question or a topic that you think we should discuss in a future show, please let us know. You can find a comment box below the episode show notes, or just leave a note as part of a review on iTunes.